welcome to episode 8 of the Business of Creativity podcast. And today I'm with Anthony Griffin. Hi, Anthony. Thank you for joining me. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, and thank you for having me. How about yourself?
Yes, I'm okay. Just as you know, trying to get this all set up so it goes smoothly. Yeah, it's really nice to have you on the show today. We've met
Oh, thank you.
through shared interests in Japan and also marketing. I read an interview with you on Kokoro Media, and when I
Oh,
read
thank you.
it was one of those articles where there are just so many points that you totally relate to. So I read that and got in touch, and it's really nice to speak with you today.
Thank
So
you.
the
Thank
episode
you.
is kind of this theme of marketing between two worlds, so
Yeah,
Japan and the US, because that's where you're from.
yeah.
Before we launch into this, do you want to give us a quick self intro?
Sure, absolutely. So, again, I'm Anthony Griffin, and I run a sole proprietorship here in Tokyo called Saga Consulting. And what I do is I help small to medium-sized Japanese companies communicate abroad in English. So,
Mm,
usually that takes the form of content marketing, a lot of writing, social media management, but there's
mm,
also a, coaching and consulting component as well that I usually work with Japanese
mhm.
managers and executives on.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's my elevator speech.
Yeah, thank you. And it's
Yeah,
going to be absolutely fascinating because we've chatted about this before, haven't we? And there's just so much to
yeah,
dive into, really. So yeah, it's fascinating. I think this idea of sort of working between two different cultures. And so I think just to kind of get us into this topic, let's start off with a bit of a warm up question. So
okay.
um, your work has a focus on content marketing. So what is your favorite online media? What's your go-to place for great content?
Well, I'm a lifelong learner, and also my clients kind of rely on me to relay the latest business trends or business philosophies.
Hmm.
So, I have to say, HBR, Harvard Business Review, they put out a lot of
Okay.
great content,
Yes, yeah,
um, as you
absolutely.
probably know,
Yeah.
and I'd say Fast Company is another great kind of more contemporary site that I like. But
Okay.
there's Forbes and Inc. and Entrepreneur, kind of those sites
Yeah.
for business content at least.
Yeah, yeah. And are you a print guy or digital? Do you like to read something in print, have it in your hands, or do you prefer, are you happy with on your mobile phone?
Wow, I've got a I've got some thoughts about that.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
Yeah, sure, go for it.
um, yeah, I prefer the look and feel and the collectability of print.
Mm,
In books, we talked about articles and websites, but I prefer books over anything because
mm,
there's something about the curation and the effort and
yeah,
the time and the
yeah,
process it takes.
yeah.
So I think the quality level is just higher. If you can get a book on a topic, it's going to be better than a lot of the clickbaity articles
Yeah,
that are
it's
out there.
true.
you know
It is true, isn't it? I sometimes I feel online you have to sort of almost wade through a lot of, standard kind of yeah, clickbait content to get to the really good stuff. And
yeah,
for me myself, I subscribe to a couple of magazines, print magazines. So I subscribe to
nice,
Wired and
nice,
Empire magazine, which is the movie magazine. So Wired is the sort of
yeah,
technology, and Empire is a movie magazine. But yeah, I love, because there's all the design behind it and the glossy pages and Wired, just the way they present it. It's very colorful, great sort of graphic design, but then
yeah,
the journalism is obviously excellent. So and I think, yeah, I think after a day on a computer as well, I think in the evening at night I tend to sort of read maybe just before I go to sleep, and then just to
Yes.
sort of hold something, and it's quiet. There's no sort of noise with it. There's no sort of pop-ups,
Yeah.
that's really nice. So yeah, I have to, maybe I'm a bit sort of old fashioned that way, but I think you can't, like you said, books or sort of high quality magazines, it's just going to be great quality. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Now
excellent.
that being said, however, and speaking of creativity, over the past couple of years, I've gotten into knowledge management, which means, not only just highlighting, but collecting those highlights, processing those highlights, and then
Hmm.
using that to kind of create content. And I hate to say it, but digital is much better for capturing that knowledge and getting it into my notes or a database. Um,
Okay. Hmm.
so, I prefer print, but, now I'm just like your previous guest, Richard, I've got most of my books and things in Kindle.
Okay. Yep. Yep. It makes sense, doesn't it? So yeah, I think a lot of us are kind of split between those two worlds. But yeah, there's pros and cons.
Yeah.
Yeah, depending on the day, the mood, what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Great. So yeah, today we're talking about sort of this content marketing between two cultures. So I would love to ask you about the challenges to market between the US, where you're from,
Sure.
and Japan, and vice versa. Obviously, there's lots of points that make it challenging, not least, the language, the culture, and the size of the US market is absolutely massive. So what do you think? What challenges do you think there are between these two countries?
Sure. Well, I should stress I primarily focus on helping Japanese companies market
Mm,
abroad.
right.
That being said, there are common mistakes that companies make going in both directions.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll see a lot of this in the interviews I do and the professionals that I talk to. It's
Mm-hmm.
not only my opinion, but most market entry experts will agree that
Mm-hmm.
when someone enters another market, they assume that they can do the same marketing techniques
Mm,
or business techniques that worked in their own country. And I see that both ways. And it, unless they're lucky, it almost always fails. You
mm-hmm.
can't write the same way. You can't just do a quick translation of your marketing copy. You really need to learn about the culture. You need to learn about what is an effective way to market or
Mm-hmm.
advertise or sell your product. And
Yeah.
either way you go, you're going to need copywriting. Not just
Yeah.
translation.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Not the sort of literal translation of your messages, but something that really sort of resonates with that kind of target audience. I mean, I remember
Yeah.
there was a classic example of, so from the US to Japan, there was a classic example with Walmart. And they wanted to go into Japan and get into the sort of build their supermarket business up in Japan, but Japanese have a very sort of specific way that they like to shop. They have their coupons. They like to kind of compare bargains. And I just remember at the time sort of reading about this, and it didn't really work out for them. I don't know if that's changed actually since that time, but I just remember hearing this as a kind of a classic example of sort of believing that you can take your model and sort of plonk it on top of the target market, and then you realize that there's just very, very specific ways that for example consumers like to shop, and it takes a bit of a rethink.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And what happened with that is the first change they had to do was partner with Seiyu, and
Mm,
the shopping experience was basically going into a regular Japanese store or supermarket, but you could find a few Walmart branded goods. And
mm-hmm.
now, don't quote me on this entirely, but I believe now they partnered with Rakuten maybe, and they're doing some
Okay. Mm,
e-commerce
mm-hmm.
as well. But yeah, that was a classic case study. And then I'm a car guy, and so one of the surprising ones that I learned in graduate school before I even moved here is at least initially, a lot of American car makers didn't even bother to put the steering wheel on the proper side when they tried
Oh,
to sell
wow.
cars here.
No way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh my
I
goodness.
was shocked.
Hmm.
And even beyond that, a lot of them just don't produce competitive models, or they don't think about how their vehicles fit into this market. So,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
know, there are countless examples out there.
Yeah. And also going back to the kind of copywriting, kind of branding element, there's the famous example in cars of the Spanish car Nova. Is it
Uh-huh.
Spanish? No, it's not Spanish, but they took the Nova car and they took
Okay.
it to the Spanish market, and Nova in Spanish means doesn't go. Uh,
Yeah, there it is. I
so
think there's a
uh,
Chevy Nova, if I remember correctly.
yeah, sorry, my car knowledge is not perfect.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And there are unfortunately lots of examples of those kind of fails, aren't there? And I remember when I was reading your article, your interview with Kokoro Media, and one of the things that I found really interesting was, you were talking about the English, your Japanese clients, trying to get their message across in English, and really making sure that the copy reads, really well, really sort of excellent English, and that also the kind of cultural messaging as well is appropriate for the US. Maybe you've seen some dubious examples.
Yeah, copywriting there are plenty. I don't want to call out some major brands, but I've seen some a major beverage brand that entered the US maybe 2 years ago.
Hmm.
Uh, and huge brand, and they had some typos on their English website, which
Hmm.
reduces credibility, especially in a competitive market. And you know, beyond copy too, there's just, you know, cultural sensitivity.
Hmm.
So we all saw the issue with Naomi Osaka,
Mm.
the animated advertisement, and
Yep.
you know, that wasn't even intended for global audiences, but the world is interconnected and the word
Yes.
got out. And
Mm.
you know, that's not something you want happening with your brand. So
Yep.
uh, you know, you really, not only do you want to have copy that reads well and that is clean, but you want to make
Hmm.
sure it's sensitive to the market that you're entering.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's fascinating. And so, you're in Japan and you have your own business and you're helping Japanese clients. And so, I think being an entrepreneur is also obviously a form of creativity. You have a vision for something, you have this idea, and you're trying to bring it to life. But you're from the US and you're doing this in Japan, which is super challenging, isn't it? So I
Yeah.
would love to hear your experiences about being an entrepreneur in Japan, and how that's working for you, because I remember um, I had heard you sort of say that you were so inspired by being in Japan, and you said it filled me with business ideas I wouldn't have had if I were in the United States, which I find a really fascinating quote. So just tell us about what it's like to be you doing what you do in Japan.
Sure. You know, Japan, in a way, was the missing piece of the puzzle in my entrepreneurial journey.
Mm,
So, ever since college, I had this idea in the back of my head about starting a business. And so I got the knowledge, I got work experience. You know, I didn't come to Japan until I was, what, 29, I think, and I'm
mm-hmm,
42 now. So, you know, I went to grad school and I did all of those steps. But while I was in the States, even though I had some freelancing experience, I never had this idea that I could chase down and pursue. But
mm,
similar to, you know, how an artist or a creative, they often get ideas by shaking things up or taking themselves out of their standard
mm,
environment. You know, that's
mm-hmm,
what Japan was for me. It was like a
mm-hmm,
fresh start, and you know, I had to look at things with, maybe the beginner's mind, as they say.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I worked for companies for most of my time here, and through
Mhm.
that process and through being open to all this newness coming in, that's when I
Mm.
could kind of see, okay, there's a market for coaching, or there's a market for copywriting here.
Yeah.
Who are the people I need to meet and get to know to make this happen and start building something. So
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it was amazing.
Was it really difficult to get started, because you've got to build these relationships, and you've got to do it in a second language as well, so was it quite a hard start on things?
Yes, however, I'm unique in I didn't come to Japan to start a business,
Mm.
so I had that in the back of my head, but
Yeah.
I just came to Japan because I enjoyed it and was interested in the country.
Mm.
So the journey happened kind of automatically. I just started working for companies, and
Mm.
I just kept studying, and I didn't feel some pressure to
Yeah.
make the leap. I just
Yeah.
met people, observed and
Uh-huh.
worked and learned, and then eventually everything came together where I had an opportunity to try it, and I had saved enough resources, and over, boy,
Mhm.
I think that was around the 8-year mark I started working for myself. So
Yeah.
after 8 years, I had met enough people and learned enough things to give it a try.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, and what's it like working with Japanese clients? I mean, obviously the Japanese have a reputation for sort of working very, very hard, very long hours. And, I've spoken with people in the past about, especially in the area of language, maybe copywriting or translations, people have their own ideas of how something should read, how something should be written. So there's a lot of back and forth. Like, how do you find sort of working with Japanese clients?
Good question. You know,
You're gonna have to say something good though, aren't you?
uh, yeah, I'll do my best. I'm in a nice, unique situation right now. So, as a sole proprietor,
Mm,
I have a niche that I work in. So I don't
yeah.
need to work with every Japanese company out there. So
Mm.
the kinds of companies that work with me are what I have come to call, foreign curious. So uh,
Okay.
they're Japanese companies, most of them,
Yeah.
but they also have accepted the fact that they're going to have to do things a little bit differently to
Mm.
expand abroad.
Mhm. Mm.
So they're usually open to my suggestions
Mm.
or ideas. That
Yeah.
doesn't mean they always agree with them, but
Mm.
they're it's quite nice actually. I don't expect everyone to automatically agree with my ideas, uh,
Mhm.
but they hear them out, and if there is something they want to do differently, we discuss it. We come to a compromise. And
Mm.
we'll produce something that we both like. So
Yeah.
to answer that question, if you choose the right client that understands what needs to be done,
Yeah.
it's quite enjoyable to work with the right Japanese
Yeah.
clients. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? I mean, I remember, so I lived in Japan for, I think it was a total of 7 or 8 years.
Right. Right.
And Yeah, I mean, I feel so fortunate to have had that experience, because I think working in a completely different culture, I was the only foreign person in the companies that I worked at. No one would speak English with me, because
Oh, wow.
it was just easier for them, quicker for them to speak in Japanese. And I think there was probably a bit of saving face. They didn't like to speak English maybe in front of their colleagues, but so I
Yes.
consider myself very fortunate to have had that very sort of international experience. But it can also be very challenging, can't it? And I remember one time I was working with this very small video production company, And we had a client, and he came to the office to visit, and we were looking at a brochure together,
Okay.
and we were reading through it, and I had highlighted a few areas where there were either mistakes or there was something that didn't really kind of sound correct in the English, a bit clunky. And so we were walking through it, and I was kind of telling him, okay, this needs changing because it's very clunky, it's very awkward. And then we finished and he left. And I remember one of my colleagues coming to me and saying, Lucy, do you think you could try to be a bit more Japanese, in the way that I had this conversation, this meeting with the client? And it was just a very interesting moment, because I think at the time I was about 27 or 28, so I was still sort of like quite young, and it was just very interesting. Like, can you try to be a bit more Japanese? And at the time I was like, should I try to be more Japanese, or should you try to understand that you're asking a kind of an English speaker, and so I might give feedback in a different way. I might be more direct than possibly that you were expecting. And I don't, I never really have the answer to that in the end. And I think it's a bit of a mix of both, isn't it? That
Yeah.
there's expectations from both sides of how a conversation will develop, how feedback will be given, and I guess there has to be a bit of give and take. I'm not Japanese. I might be a little bit more direct, perhaps. But when you're in Japan, of course, you do feel like you want to uh, not behave like a Japanese person, but you are aware that you need to perhaps adapt a little bit, especially if you're the only kind of foreigner there. But I don't know what your take is on all of that.
No, I agree, and I tend to adapt a lot, maybe too much,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes. However, it's you have to figure out, where you draw your line. For
Mm.
example, when it comes, you've got to maintain yourself, whatever that is.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
I'm kind of lucky. Coincidentally, my character and personality and feedback style tends to be compatible with Japan. But it all goes back to what I think is the benefit of working for yourself or running a business is you get to choose who you work
Yeah.
with. And
Yeah.
when you find a compatible client, I think those issues are minimized. You kind of
Yeah.
understand each other.
Yeah.
Where if you speak to the corporate experience, which I've also had,
Mm-hmm.
then I think you run into a lot more of those situations where you
Mm.
have those misunderstandings, since
Mm.
you're an employee and you've got to toe the line, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah, I guess it's the same anywhere, I guess, isn't it? At some point, you sort of, in certain situations, you just have to kind of toe the line, and it's sort of judging that. But yeah, I mean, it's just interesting, isn't it? Because when you are in Japan for such a long time, I mean, are you comfortable with, um, the social situations? Do you find yourself taking on very naturally sort of Japanese habits, like bowing, or not that I want to sort of the cultural stereotypes, but it's just interesting that when you are in Japan, you sort of do pick up these habits. Like on the phone, I remember my colleague always used to stress, you should say just keep reassuring the person that you're listening, whereas I never did that so much. But I sort of got myself in the habit. Have you picked up any sort of classic sort of Japanese habits?
Sure. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a great way to kind of figure out, how Japanese you can be. So I pick up most of the bowing and the communication cues, because I don't think it's a big deal to do those things, to
Mm,
speak as a Japanese person would if you're speaking Japanese, and to have
yeah.
the gestures and the
Mm,
mannerisms that a Japanese person would. That
mm,
doesn't change my character or quality of work.
yeah.
However, on the other hand, we talked about how to figure out where to draw the line.
Mm.
I'm not huge on nomikai culture, so you
Okay.
know, going
Yeah,
out,
drinks with the team. Yeah.
yeah, it's good on occasion, but
Yeah.
5 days week, 2 or 3 hours after work, I that's
How do they do it? Yeah.
yeah. So, in that case, then my character starts to show up. And one thing that I do is I tend to suggest other activities like, hey, let's go jogging around the Imperial Palace, or let's go cycling, or, let's drinking is great, but let's
It
also,
has consequences.
yeah, if you're into these other things, we can do that as well,
Yeah.
and build relationships, and also maybe get healthy, and as well. So that's when my character comes in. But if it's just
Yeah.
bowing and following the social norms, I think
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
easy to do.
And I think also when you speak Japanese, that comes more naturally. If you're
Yeah,
maybe speaking in English, you're very much still in your kind of English, sort of British or American kind of state of mind. But I guess when you start to speak Japanese, maybe all this kind of slots into place more easily because it just puts you in a slightly different place. And what I would love to ask you as a kind of final question is the
sure.
Japanese language, which is, notoriously difficult. I mean, it was when I was working in Japanese companies, all the different levels of politeness and
Yeah,
the pressure feeling that you kind of I've got to kind of uh, show the hierarchy, and I've got to show my respect in all this kind of in all these grammatical ways. It's difficult, let alone all
sure.
the kanji to learn. So
Yeah.
how have you coped with the Japanese language and studying it, and have you mastered it?
I am far from mastering it. I want to stress that I'm,
Uh-huh.
a work in progress, and basically my level right now is I'm comfortable writing emails and attending
Mm.
meetings in Japanese, and going about my daily life in
Mhm.
Japanese, traveling and so on.
Yeah.
But yeah, to give long presentations in Japanese, or to do deep writing in Japanese, all of those things are still ahead of me. But
Mm.
to answer your question, for me, it's just been a matter of perseverance and
Mhm. Yeah.
patience. This
Yeah.
has been, a 12-year journey, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the other thing is, even though my Japanese isn't, you know, professional or super great, I'm not afraid to use it and test myself as I develop. So
Yeah.
you have to put yourself out there. So, for example, before I lived here, when I just vacationed here, I would do something like try to buy Narita Express tickets only using Japanese, and just to see if I could pull it off. And then,
Yeah.
once I moved here, I said, okay, let me try to go to Sendai and Matsushima by myself with
Uh-huh.
only using Japanese for 3 or 4 days.
Yeah.
Um, then,
Wow.
years later, the next test was doing an interview in Japanese and getting a job offer
Yeah.
in
Yes.
Japanese. And then
Yeah.
from there it kept going. So I keep
Yeah.
testing myself.
Yeah.
Even though there are consequences to that sometimes, I just test myself every day, and now I'm just documenting my learning journey through a lot of the articles that you might be reading on Kokoro Media.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. Yes, I mean, honestly, I really admire your spirit. I'm sure you will succeed because you have a vision of how, where you want to be and what you want to achieve.
Oh, thank you.
So yeah, yeah, it's very admirable. I mean, yeah, Japanese, it's tricky. I remember phone calls were always the most stressful thing, picking up the
Yeah,
phone and someone says, hello, blah, 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 blah. I'm just
yeah.
like, I don't
It,
know what you're saying.
if you don't mind, let me share a very humbling story about that, in case people are struggling with that in the beginning. But
Whew, it's
y-
horrible.
yeah, you touched on a memory when I first, I'd say within my first year here, making restaurant reservations on the phone was
Uh-huh.
was so terrifying that I would often, if I was, in Shinjuku, and even if
Uh-huh.
I had to just kind of go 30 minutes out of my way, I would rather walk to the restaurant and make the reservation in person,
Oh, yeah.
instead
Yeah.
of trying to call them. That's so when you mentioned phone calls, I just had that memory. Fortunately,
Yeah.
those days are behind me, but
Yeah. I
I
think a lot
relate.
of
I relate.
people I think yeah, I think for a lot of people there's something about being on the phone which is just a different level, a different kind of challenge. I don't know if it's because maybe when you talk to someone, there's something about seeing their face
Yeah,
and maybe even watching their lips. I don't know what it is, but if you
yeah,
do it on the phone, there's something so much more this it's just scary and it's just intimidating. So when I was in the office and the phone used to ring and I'd be like, I'm typing on my desk, I'm so busy, I can't answer the phone, hoping someone would pick it up, but
nice.
um couldn't get away with it all the time.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
You're spot on with it with that. So,
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, I mean, it's been, I mean, wow, we're at half an hour.
yeah.
It
Wow.
always goes so quickly.
Mhm.
I just love to hear people's experiences of kind of moving out to Japan and kind of starting a new life and all the challenges that go with that. But like I said, I'm sure you will succeed because you're very driven and just and a super nice guy to
Oh,
get
thank
to
you.
know. So it was a real
Fingers crossed.
pleasure. Yeah, you'll be fine, I'm sure. Do you think you'll
Thank
ever
you.
get back to the US, or you're not sure?
My home is here. This is my base. But I do have ambitions to spend more time in the U.S. and create stronger connections through the country.
Mm,
Before the pandemic, I was up to about 2 months a year in the U.S., which is,
that's nice.
um,
Yeah,
yeah, it's important personally, but also professionally. So,
yeah,
uh,
yeah,
yeah, to answer your question, I hope to spend more time in the U.S., but
yeah.
Japan is my home. Yeah,
Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. Well, thank you so much for today. And I'm sure we'll catch up, again in the future. And all the best.
yeah, and thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to keeping in touch.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, bye.
Take care.